Hi everyone, this is Dr. Tracy McCarthy, psychologist, attorney, and educator, and welcome to our discussion related to psycho-spiritual warfare. As we discussed previously, psychology and spirituality are not the same things, but sometimes they actually go together, and that's what we are going to be looking at. So we're going to be looking at this dynamic that entails a bit of psychological warfare and also a bit of spiritual warfare. And so together you have psycho-spiritual warfare. We're going to be looking at two defense mechanisms, actually. And the defense mechanisms tend to go hand in hand. You have one, which is projection. And often when individuals are involved in projection, you have a dynamic of introjection. And that's often the goal of the projector, is to have the recipient of the projection engage in introjection. And so we're going to touch on that. Psychospiritual warfare can come in many forms. An individual perpetrator can use words, they can use sounds, they can use images, they can use any number of things in order to engage in psychospiritual warfare. What we are going to look at is the dynamic of combining words, images, and messages. Some of it is manifest, meaning it's overt, and then some of it is latent. A substantial portion of it is latent. And so we're going to be looking at it through the eyes of artwork. And this artwork is coming out of Iberia. And so to get us started, to provide a foundation so that you understand what we are looking at here in terms of this psychology of introjection and the psychology of projection. When you have projection, it's basically an individual that is projecting onto someone else something that is undesirable in the self. And so they don't want it in the self. They don't accept it in the self. It's a negative thing that's in the self. And instead of accepting that and dealing with that and working through that, they put that off onto someone else and then magnify it in another person. And so that's basically how projection works. What's happening also with projection often is this dynamic of introjection, and it's an unconscious adoption by the recipient of whatever ideas or attitudes or beliefs are being projected by the other person. And when they do this, they internalize it, they take on these traits or the beliefs of other people that they deem either more capable or superior, or individuals who've been presenting themselves as more capable or superior. The situation that we're going to be looking at with this projection introjection dynamic is coming out of Iberia. It's a piece of artwork. Art is interesting because with art you can have a number of dynamics going on, and the interpretation of art is not limited to the artist. It's not limited to any individual. And so you may have polysemy where you have multiple interpretations of this symbolic representation. In this particular situation, it doesn't matter so much the intent of the artist. What you have is a serious and significant impact with respect to this particular piece of artwork. What's also noteworthy with respect to this idea of projection is the name of the artist. Part of the name of the artist is tied into the name that is given to the piece of artwork. And so that's when you start to look at this possibility of projection and the inducement of introjection by the targeted individual. And so the individual artist has an interesting name. One part of the name is Curia. What's curious about Curia is that this word, it comes from the Latin, and it means calm, vir, meaning conviria. And so it has an interesting meaning, and it is definitely tied to what we are going to be looking at. So this coviria dynamic coming out of Curia. And so in preparation for looking at this piece of art, I want you to keep in mind that this piece of art looks like a piece of projection. This piece of art looks abusive. This piece of art involves a process whereby some individuals will engage in introjection based upon the person who is creating the art and the message that is going along with the image of the art. And so you need to be consciously aware of that so that you don't introject any of the mess that is represented in this piece of artwork. So during this current situation, the artist created a piece of art and thought it would be appropriate to name the piece of art COVID. As you can see from the depiction, there is a particular phenotype that goes along with this name. The person has it in quotation marks. And so the individual is presenting a particular phenotype with a particular hairstyle type that is being presented as reminiscent of the microbe or the disease-causing organism that's associated with the name of the piece of artwork. And so when you look at the hairstyle, it resembles Bantu knots in some ways, but you have these protrusions that are coming out of the head that are reminiscent of what is known as the spike protein. And so what you have here is an artist rendering that presents humanity, a human being, the image of a human being as being reduced to that of a disease causing organism, a disease in and of itself. And what makes this really odd is, aside from the United States and aside from South Africa, you do not hear about large numbers of individuals who would even remotely fit this phenotype having this particular label attached to them. So in Africa, that is not a label that is readily attached to a number of people because of the numbers that have been represented there. And so you have this depiction being offered and this labeling of the depiction being offered and this projection onto this image of the name that actually belongs to the individual creating this piece of artwork. This name, the piece of artwork, the image, the message has both psychological implications and spiritual implications. And it is noted that this is coming out of Iberia, which is a home for all sorts of historical derogatory depictions and also the enslavement and oppression of the masses of people on the entire planet. And what assists with this inducing of introjection dynamic are these cartoon-like depictions of this microbe. These are not actual depictions of a microbe. These also are artist renderings, but these artist renderings lend themselves to all sorts of extrapolations and interpretations and representations. And in this particular case, the hair of the individual that is being depicted is seen as, presented as synonymous with this spike protein dynamic and this microbe. And so you have this dynamic of the spike protein, which is considered the dangerous part of this particular microbe, being presented as emanating from the head of, the body of this human being depiction that has been reduced to a disease, that has been reduced to a microbe, that has been reduced to a virus. An additional issue to make note of with respect to this psycho-spiritual warfare dynamic is that some of the words that are being used in this current situation and in this current crisis, some of these words are rooted in the same thing. And so some of these words are actually interchangeable. And so it's important to keep that at the forefront of the mind, because unconsciously, subconsciously, people may introject all sorts of things based upon this dynamic. For instance, the root vir translates to the root sem. The root vir also translates to the word omi, or the root omi. And so you have an interchangeable nature with respect to vir and sem and omi. And together, these translate to, relate to, are interrelated with the word man, humanity, mankind. And so you have an odd dynamic here where a microbe is seen as interchangeable in terms of that foundation with the word or the root sem, the word man, the word omi, and all of these are related to humanity in one way or another. When you finish tracing it, you come up with man or humanity. And in this instance, what you have going on here is, based upon the messages related to this current situation, is that man, humanity, is seen as a virus. Humanity is seen as something that is dangerous. Humanity is seen as something that needs to be mitigated. And specifically, humanity related to this word sem is something that is seen as contagious and dirty, and something that requires mitigation and amelioration. And so with all of that in mind, it's important that when you are consuming media, you are consuming these images and these messages that are presented around this particular situation, that you focus on being very conscious of what it is that you are taking in, because the messages are coming fast and furious, and the messages are coming in a very conflated way. And so you may not automatically tease things out. But when you see these words, you need to be conscious of what is going on with the message that is going on with the image, what is going on with the latent presentations as well as the manifest presentations. And you need to be conscious of the dynamic of accidentally introjecting the mess that goes along with all of this. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.